The Country Walk case is a Florida 1985, multi-victim, multi-offender child sex abuse case that occurred during the daycare sex abuse hysteria. As of 2020, Frank Foster remains imprisoned, making him allegedly the last perpetrator in this moral panic. His wife Ileana Flores Foster initially denied any wrongdoing, but following months of interrogations, she testified against Frank and confessed to the alleged crimes, later recanting her confession, then recanting her recantation, and finally recanting that. This case became known because it seemed to have better evidence than other ritual abuse cases, but scientific findings since Foster's conviction have challenged the evidence. The case, prosecuted by Janet Reno, was profiled in the 2002 Frontline episode, Did Daddy Do It? The Fosters. Frank Foster, aka Francisco Foster Escalona, had recently married Ileana Flores. They owned the Country Walk babysitting service in the Country Walk suburb of Miami, Florida. He had been convicted for the 1969 manslaughter of Jack, or Jacob Eisenbrick, shot in the head in 1980, and convicted for fondling a 9-year-old child in 1981. He pled guilty to manslaughter and does not dispute this conviction, but now does dispute his responsibility. In his earlier fondling case, he refused a plea bargain of 6 months probation, was convicted and initially sentenced to 2 years probation, and has always maintained his innocence. He regrets following the advice of his lawyer, Henri Rauch, in not taking the stand in this case. Would et.al., who defend Foster in the Country Walk case, have no doubt he was rightfully convicted in his 2 previous cases. According to his defense team, his probation officer approved Foster's working at a daycare. In 1985 he was charged and convicted of 14 counts of child sexual abuse at this daycare. He was sentenced to prison with a minimum length of 165 years. The Foster's victims testified that the Fosters led them in satanic rituals and terrorized them by forcing them to watch Mr. Foster mutilate birds, a lesson to children who might reveal the abuse. Testimony from children in the case was elicited by University of Miami child psychologists Lori and Joseph Braga, who resorted to allegedly coercive questioning of the children when the desired answers were not forthcoming, allegedly questioning the Foster's son for 7 hours. Joseph Braga's training was in education, Lori Braga's was in speech pathology. The Bragas became known as the Pied Pipers of child abuse. While other alleged ritual abuse cases also had such elicited testimony, this case seemed to have the hard evidence of the Foster's son's positive gonorrhea test and a confession from Mr. Foster's wife Ileana. The gonorrhea test was new and found to be unreliable as it cannot distinguish that organism from others that occur normally in both children's and adult throats, and has a false positive rate of over 1/3. The prosecutors destroyed the test sample, preventing a retest. The positive gonorrhea test seemed to have convinced the prosecution of the Fosters' guilt, so they sought a confession from Ileana. Attorney Michael Von Zemft had been representing both Fosters but dropped Francisco and tried to help Ileana recover memories of abuse. Francisco's defender thus became his prosecutor. Von Zemft and the prosecution brought in contractors called the behavior changers to extract a confession from Ileana. Ileana, in 2001, described the behavior changers. Since they had all the stories from the children and I didn't remember, they will make me close my eyes and just they will tell me the story. They would tell me the story. Then in my mind, I have to go step by step the way how they were telling me the story. I had to imagine that that was happening. If I made a mistake, then they would correct me. They would tell me the name of the children. I couldn't remember all of them, so they would correct me again. And we would do this over and over until I got the memory piece that supposedly was missing. Following this treatment, in 1985 Michael Rappaport, of the Behavior Changers, and Janet Reno accompanied Ileana during her deposition against Frank, in which she gave many lurid details including snakes and feces and was periodically interrupted and guided by Rappaport. Sociologist Richard She studied the case and in his deposition concluded that Ileana Foster was hypnotized repeatedly prior to trial, that Ileana has personality characteristics that indicate the high level of suggestibility coupled with a great desire to please, that the testimony she eventually gave against her husband is likely to have included a great many elements that were suggested to her by therapists in the weeks leading up to trial, and that, as a result, her trial testimony cannot be considered reliable, factual or as historical truth. Off said that this leaves no question that the behavior changers were involved in coercing a confession. Ileana Flores, however, did not admit to such lurid claims when she pled guilty, instead maintaining that she was innocent but wanted to get all of this over. Ileana served 3 years imprisonment, where she divorced her husband and was born again. She was then deported to Honduras, accompanied by members of her new church. The Fosters lost custody of their son, Noel, who did not testify. He went to live with his biological mother and her husband. He has since always denied that he was abused. Because Noel denied being abused, he did not share in the settlements of over $5 million paid to the families of the alleged victims, in this case by the Disney-owned Arvida Corporation. Developers of Country Walk. Ileana offered lurid testimony against her husband after she had pled guilty but before she was sentenced. She later recanted her court testimony, claiming that she had been kept naked in solitary confinement and subjected to other forms of physical and psychological duress until she had agreed to testify against her husband. Defense investigator Stephen Dinerstein confirmed this, deposing that the shower, when received, is a hosing down in the cell, that she is in a cell with nothing in it but a light in the ceiling, and that she is often kept nude and in view of everybody and anybody. Flores told Frontline that prosecutor Janet Reno visited her in jail, saying, "I'm sorry, but you are not innocent. You're going to have to help us." The number and timing of Reno's visits are in dispute, with Rappaport claiming at least 30 such visits, and admitting to 34 interrogations of his own. Ileana's interrogations have been described as torture that defense witness Ralph Underwager described as similar to the psychological torture of American prisoners of war in the Korean War. When von Zandt dropped Frank, it left him with defense attorney Jeffrey Samek. Foster says that after his 1981 conviction, Samek wanted to handle his appeal, but then Samek found no ground for appeal, which Foster says prevented his filing an appeal on time. In the 1985 trial, Samek accused Foster of assaulting him and Foster accused Samek of lying. Both requested that Samek be replaced, but the judge did not permit this. Foster later admitted that he took Samek by his clothes and put him against a wall. When Foster was convicted, Samek said, "There is some feeling someone charged with these crimes is guilty until proven innocent. I'm not saying that's the case here." At his deposition, Dinerstein complained that Foster's defense lawyers were not interested and refused to meet him when he discovered exculpatory information. Foster's appeal, claim of ineffective assistance of counsel, was rejected as he did not make this claim on time. In 1995 in Honduras, Ileana gave a deposition to Arthur Cohen, an appeal lawyer representing Foster, that she could not remember any child abuse, because nothing really happened. A judge ruled that this was sufficient to call for a hearing regarding a new trial for Foster, and arrange for Ileana to testify remotely from Honduras. Soon thereafter, Reverend Tommy Watson, the minister of her new church that was paying for her education and who had helped to negotiate her early release and deportation, flew to Honduras to meet with Ileana. There Ileana signed a letter recanting her denial, witnessed by Watson. This prevented the hearing that attorneys Cohen and Robert Rosenthal were trying to arrange for Frank. In her 2001 Frontline interview, Ileana changed her story once again, claiming that Watson threatened her into signing that letter. Frontline producer and director Michael Kirk said, "The question to me is not whether Ileana is a liar. Ileana is a liar. The only question is when. When she pled guilty, or now? As of 2020, Frank Foster continues to serve a 165-year prison sentence. Foster and his defense claimed that he rejected a plea bargain of a 15-year sentence that would have released him even sooner. His many appeals and requests for clemency have been unsuccessful, and he has lacked legal representation since 2003. In 2012, the Innocence Project declined to take his case, telling Foster, "We have reviewed your case and have determined that our office cannot accept it," with no further explanation. He will not be eligible for parole until 2134.in. The witch hunt narrative. Ross Eachite argues that most of those accused in alleged daycare sex abuse hysteria cases, including the Country Walk case, the McMartin preschool trial, and the Oak Hill satanic ritual abuse trial, were actually guilty. The district attorney declared the Oak Hill defendants actually innocent, so they were compensated for their imprisonment. James M. Wood, Debbie Nathan, Richard Beck, and Keith Hampton criticized that Eachite's work has omitted or mischaracterized important facts or ignored relevant scientific information and is often factually inaccurate and tends to make strong assertions without integrating relevant scholarly and scientific information. Casey Johnson writes, even as Eachite's book gives every benefit of the doubt to the investigators and prosecutors, much of Eachite's evidence nonetheless portrays the prosecutions as massive miscarriages of justice. The Miami Method. The case was prosecuted by Dade County State's Attorney Janet Reno. Her Miami Method to prosecute daycare sex abuse cases was also used to prosecute Bobby Fitchens and Grant Snowden. These cases were profiled in the 1998 Frontline episode, The Child Terror. Bobby Fitchens, 14 when accused and 16 when tried, was accused of sexually molesting 21 children in his care during church services. The charges were driven by the testimony of children interviewed by mental health professionals using techniques later discredited. A psychologist told one child, who was denying abuse, that if she made an accusation, "You won't have to keep answering my questions." She made an accusation. While interrogated, diabetic Fitchens was deprived of food and confessed to touching a child, only to retract it as soon as he was released. Attorney Mel Black was one of Fitchens' defenders. The church where the abuse was alleged had an insurance policy that paid about $1 million for Fitchens' defense. Stephen Sussy testified in Fitchens' defense, but also conveyed a plea bargain offer from the prosecution to Fitchens' family. The prosecution dropped one of the child accusers before the trial, so that a jury would not hear her story about digging up graves and a woman turned into a witch. During the trial, the prosecution was unable to present any witnesses to the alleged abuse. Fitchens refused a plea bargain and was acquitted of all charges. University of Utah psychology professor and defense witness David Raskin said that Fitchens' refusal to plea marked the crucial difference between the Fitchens and Country Walk cases. They thought they'd offer Bobby a deal he couldn't refuse, but they were not able to do to him what they did to Eliana Foster. In 1997, Fitchens and the Foster's son Noel attended a Day of Contrition conference in Salem, Massachusetts, along with experts and others who had been freed in similar cases. Initially, the charges against Harold Grant Snowden, a policeman, were dropped. Then Reno brought in the broadcast to question the children. Snowden was first acquitted, then retried with younger children and sentenced to 5 life sentences. His state appeals were rejected, so he was imprisoned for 12 years before a 1997 federal appeal was successful. In overturning his conviction, the 11th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals concluded that allowing expert testimony to boost the credibility of the main witness against Snowden, considering the lack of other evidence of guilt, violated his right to due process by making his criminal trial fundamentally unfair. The appeals court ruled that the positive gonorrhea test, performed by the same doctor at the same lab as in the Foster case, was unreliable in this case. Assistant Attorney General Michael Nyman argued against releasing Snowden on bail and letting him speak to the press while they considered retrying him, but the court denied these requests. The prosecution vowed to continue prosecuting, but the U.S. Supreme Court denied their appeal, so they dismissed the charges on November 22, 1998. Upon release, when Snowden was looking for work, his wife's ex-husband helped get Snowden's name removed from sex offender lists. Some attempted to raise questions about these cases when Reno was nominated for U.S. Attorney General. Debbie Nathan's journal article was faxed to the White House, and Fijn's father, a Dutch diplomat, sent a letter to the Senate Judiciary Committee. Raskin argued that the Fijns case in particular should be raised at Reno's confirmation hearings, but Black was more forgiving and opposed this. Black's view prevailed as Reno was not then questioned about any of these cases. When asked about the Country Walk case while running for governor of Florida in 2002, Reno replied, "I haven't looked at the file in 15 years. I would need you to bring me all the files, and I don't foresee having the time to go through the files." Unspeakable Acts. This case inspired a 1986 book and a 1990 ABC made-for-TV movie, both called Unspeakable Acts. The book and early reviews accepted the prosecution's account, but Debbie Nathan criticized author Jen Hollingsworth for leaving out important facts and not disclosing her relationship to the prosecutors. Hollingsworth had left her position as a TV reporter to become a paid consultant to the broadcast. The movie starred Jill Clayburgh and Brad Davis as Lori and Joseph Braga, and Gregory Sierra and Bess Meyer as Frank and Ileana Foster. But neither Reno nor any of Ileana's other interrogators were portrayed. The movie changed the Foster's child from a son to a daughter. At the end of the movie, star Clayburgh spoke, out of character, about detecting signs of sexual abuse in children. The movie and its contemporary reviews accepted the prosecution's and book's theory. The New York Times praised the movie for avoiding exploitation and sensationalism, but People magazine penned the movie as harsh, sanctimonious, and painful to watch. Some parents of the alleged victims objected to the movie for reopening old wounds. Frank Foster has been seriously attacked 5 times in prison, most recently in 2018. And most seriously when a fellow prisoner stabbed Foster in the neck after a rebroadcast of this movie. See also Daycare sex abuse hysteria McMartin preschool trial satanic ritual abuse. References. Further reading Ross E. Chait, David Mervis, Myths About the Country Walk Case, Journal of Child Sexual Abuse, Volume 16-3, 2007 Debbie Nathan, Revisiting Country Walk, Issues in Child Abuse Accusations, Volume 5-1, 1993. Case Summary from Frontline, The Child Terror with video testimony and affidavit from Richard Unspeakable Acts at IMDb.